You help your child get started. You remind them what comes next. You guide every step. And somehow, they lose interest. They stop trying on their own. They wait for you. What if the way we help is quietly doing the opposite? In this video, we're going to break down what research shows actually builds real motivation in kids, and how small shifts in how you help can change everything. In 2023, researchers published a study in Frontiers in Psychology that looked at something most parents don't realize they're teaching. They weren't measuring intelligence. They weren't testing behavior. They were observing how children's motivation changed based on how adults helped. Specifically, they compared moments where adults guided every step to moments where adults stayed supportive but stepped back. What they tracked was simple but revealing. How long children stayed engaged, whether they kept going when tasks got harder, and whether they took initiative without being prompted. The difference was striking when adults frequently cued children, reminding, directing, correcting. Children became more dependent on that guidance. They waited, they checked in, they stopped moving unless prompted. But when adults supported without controlling, motivation increased. Children stayed with tasks longer. They initiated more on their own. They persisted even when things weren't easy. The researchers didn't conclude that kids lack motivation. They concluded something far more uncomfortable, that how adults help can quietly shape whether motivation grows or fades, which means helping isn't the problem. How we help is. Helping feels like the right thing to do. You see your child hesitate. You jump in. You point. You remind. You guide them through it. And in the moment, it works. The task gets done. There's less frustration. Everyone moves on. But over time, something subtle starts to happen. Your child waits. They look to you before starting. They stop when you stop talking. The research explains why. When adults cue too often, effort quietly shifts hands. The work still happens, but the ownership moves from the child to the adult. So, motivation doesn't disappear. It just stops belonging to the child. They learn an invisible lesson. Someone else is in charge of this. That's why helping can backfire. Not because support is bad, but because constant direction teaches children to wait for instructions instead of listening to themselves. And once effort becomes adult-driven, children don't push through on their own. They pause, they check, they disengage. To understand how to change this, we need to get clear on one critical difference: the difference between cueing and real motivation. Cueing sounds harmless, helpful even. Start here. Don't forget this part. Now, do the next step. It's subtle, and that's what makes it powerful. Cueing happens when an adult stays mentally inside the task, tracking each step, anticipating mistakes, guiding the process as it unfolds. Motivation works differently. Motivation grows when the child feels, "This is mine." Not perfectly done, not efficient, but owned. The research draws a clear line here. When adults cue, control shifts outward. The child is responding to direction. When adults step back while staying supportive, control shifts inward. The child begins to self-direct. This isn't about ignoring children. It's about who holds the steering wheel. In cued moments, the adult is driving. The child is following. In motivated moments, the child is driving. The adult is riding along. That difference shows up quickly. With cueing, children look up often. They ask, "Is this right?" They hesitate before acting. With motivation, children stay focused longer. They adjust on their own. They keep going even when it's imperfect. The study showed that when children experienced more autonomy-supportive moments, their engagement increased, not because tasks were easier, but because effort felt self-directed. Cueing gets things done. Motivation builds someone who keeps going. And once you see the difference, you start noticing how often good intentions quietly get in the way. Which brings us to the first place. Motivation actually starts. Motivation starts with ownership, before effort, before persistence, before pride. Children work harder on what feels like it belongs to them. The research showed this again and again. When children had more control over how a task unfolded, they stayed engaged longer. But ownership is fragile. It disappears the moment an adult steps in too quickly. You might recognize this. Your child starts a task. They hesitate. You jump in to help. You straighten. You correct. You speed things up. And suddenly, it's no longer theirs. The task still gets done. But the motivation quietly drains away. From the child's perspective, the message is subtle but clear. If I don't do this right, someone else will take over. So, they stop trying. In the study, children showed more persistence when adults allowed them to struggle a little. Not struggle alone, not struggle without support, but struggle without interference. That might look like waiting a few extra seconds before stepping in, letting the tower wobble, letting the pencil marks be uneven, letting the shoes go on the wrong feet at first. When children feel that a task belongs to them, mistakes don't end motivation. They fuel it. Children adjust. They try again. They stay curious. Ownership tells the child, "This is my work. I get to figure it out." And that belief is what effort grows from. Once ownership is in place, another shift becomes possible. Space. The kind of space that invites initiative rather than waiting. Space is uncomfortable for adults. Silence feels like inaction. Waiting feels like neglect. So, we fill the gap. We remind. We prompt. We nudge. But the research showed something counterintuitive. When adults reduced cueing and allowed more space, children initiated more on their own. Space gives the child room to think, to notice what needs to happen next, to test an idea, to recover from a mistake without being corrected. This doesn't mean disappearing. It means staying emotionally available while stepping back cognitively. You're there. You're watching. But you're not steering. In the study, autonomy-supportive adults resisted the urge to direct every step. They waited. And in that waiting, children surprised them. They persisted longer. They experimented more. They didn't immediately look for approval. At home, this might look like letting your child pause without jumping in, letting them ask for help instead of offering it, letting the process be slower than you'd like. The hardest part is trusting the space, trusting that learning is happening even when it's quiet, trusting that effort doesn't always look efficient. When children sense that space is safe, they begin to fill it themselves. They start without being told. They keep going without reminders. That's not laziness disappearing. That's initiative emerging. And once initiative takes root, feedback starts to matter in a different way. What you say during effort matters, but not in the way most of us think. Praise is meant to motivate, and sometimes it does. But the research made an important distinction. Feedback that evaluates can quietly take control away. Feedback that reflects keeps ownership with the child. "You're so smart." "That's perfect." "Good job." These sound positive, but they shift attention outward. The child starts working for approval instead of engagement. In contrast, informational feedback keeps motivation intact. "You kept going even when it got tricky." "You tried a few different ways." "You didn't give up." The difference is subtle but powerful. One tells the child how they're doing. The other helps them notice what they're doing. The study showed that when adults focused on effort and process without directing outcomes, children stayed engaged longer. They didn't rush to finish. They didn't wait for the next cue. They stayed with the task. This kind of feedback doesn't steer. It mirrors. It says, I see your effort. Not, here's how to do it better. When children feel seen instead of judged, motivation becomes internal. They begin to notice their own progress. They feel pride without needing permission. Effort becomes rewarding on its own. And once effort feels satisfying, children don't need to be pushed. They pull themselves forward, which raises an important question. If less direction builds motivation, when should we actually help? Help is still important. The research isn't saying to step back all the time. It's saying to help without taking over. Real help supports effort. It doesn't replace it. That means stepping in when a child is stuck emotionally, not just when the task looks messy. If frustration is rising, presence matters. You sit close, you stay calm, you help regulate, but you don't immediately solve. If confusion sets in, guidance can help, but it works best when it restores ownership. Instead of telling them what to do, you might ask a simple question. What do you think comes next? Want to try one more way? This kind of help keeps the child in the driver's seat. The research showed that support was most effective when it reduced stress without removing agency. Children who received this kind of help didn't shut down. They re-engaged. They didn't wait for instructions. They used the support to keep going. At home, this often means resisting the urge to jump in too soon. Let them struggle a little. Watch their cues. Help when emotion overwhelms effort, not before. When help restores confidence instead of replacing effort, motivation stays alive. And over time, something shifts. Children begin to help themselves. They start tasks without prompting. They persist longer. They feel capable. That's the difference between doing things for children and raising children who want to do things themselves. And once you see it, you start noticing motivation everywhere it quietly grows. Over time, the changes are easy to miss if you're not looking for them. Your child starts without being asked. They stick with tasks a little longer. They don't immediately look to you for the next step. Nothing dramatic. Nothing loud. But real. The research showed that when children experienced more autonomy-supportive moments, their motivation became more stable. They didn't need constant reminders. They didn't wait for cues. They trusted themselves to keep going. You might notice fewer power struggles, less resistance when things get challenging, more quiet confidence in how your child approaches effort. Motivation stops being something you manage. It becomes something your child carries. And it doesn't come from doing less as a parent. It comes from doing something different, stepping back just enough, holding space instead of control, letting effort belong to the child. Progress won't be perfect. Some days will still need reminders. That's normal. But if there's one thing to try this week, it's this. Pause before cueing. Wait a few seconds longer than feels comfortable. If this helped, like and subscribe. And tell me in the comments, what's one moment where you're going to try stepping back and letting your child lead?